Alan's from the UK, and Alan looks our age, but Alan's he's a little older, but he's a good martial arts practitioner, so we can't really tell.
Granddad.
He's also a grandpa,
Yeah.
and he's got kids, so he has a really good perspective because I think Thomas and I are both millennials, and so a lot of us millennials and Gen Z, it's like we're not able to live that classic American slash like family dream anymore. Like a lot of us are getting married much later, if not ever, and then a lot of
Mhm.
us aren't having kids, and it's like Alan being, I guess, a Gen Xer is maybe the last generation that really were able to kind of like, oh, if I wanted to live that classic life, I can do it. So it was like it's cool to get this. Thomas, you're around my age, right? You're in your 30s.
So I'm 27 actually. So
Oh,
I'm
okay, this
I'm
is perfect then. So you're like a older Gen Z, in fact,
right.
or like a young millennial. Okay, this is actually pretty cool. Like
Yeah.
Alan's like Zennial slash X.
Yeah.
Zennial's like combining X and millennial. So Alan's like Zennial. I'm millennial, and Thomas is like young Z or old millennial. Old.
Yeah, so
X.
I am the last generation that had all of the kind of analog stuff. Even
Yeah.
mobile phones were analog when I was young,
Oh wow.
like
Analog.
they
Look
went
at
over
that,
to
Alan.
digital.
Wow. Yeah, you have an
Yeah,
analog. Wow, look at that. Yeah, those were the TVs back then.
yeah.
Yeah, I collect VHS, so it's like I
Wow.
got
I remember like back when mobile
Alan's
phones
chart
first
off
came
right
out,
here.
Hmm.
you could listen into people's conversations because
Yeah,
you had a
yeah,
scanner.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and it was only when they went over to digital that that kind of stopped. But um, yeah, it is. I remember like going to buy like my first home and thinking, oh my God, like how expensive property's gotten. And like the first home was like 65 grand for like a three-bedroom house. Like that same house now is over 200,000. But wages haven't kept up. And I think, I spoke to like my first TikTok channel kind of it started off as a martial arts channel and quickly got taken over talking about incel culture.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I think, a lot of people are despondent with politics because politics no longer represents people. It represents big money, and whoever you vote for, they don't have your interest at heart. But we continue to vote as if it's a football team. I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican, or I'm a Labour, I'm a Conservative. And until we get rid of that kind of way of thinking, we're screwed. Because voting's supposed to work by you offer me something and I vote for you. But what did the Democrats offer for the Americans this year? It was last year. It was vote for us. We're not Trump. Okay, great. You're not Trump, but what does that mean for me? What are you going to do for my life? Well, we won't be as bad as Trump. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, we get it. You're not going to be as bad as that guy, but what are you actually offering me? Well, we're not Trump, so things aren't going to be as bad as with Trump. And you're like, but what are you going to do for me? And then people didn't vote for them, and then they lost, and now they're like blaming the American people. It's like, no, offer people something. Like whatever you say about Trump, and I think he's like quite an evil person overall. I think like you've he offered people something. He offered them change, and I think the change is going to be for the worse. But he still offered them change.
And I'll bring in Thomas here. Thomas, what is Croatia's democracy like? Do you guys have a parliamentary system like how Alan is in the UK? Okay, tell me more.
Yes, it's a parliamentary system. So right now, there's we have quite a similar situation where it's like Democrat Republican, where there's like two big like parties, and one is like left leaning, right leaning, but they're all just like remnants of old systems. Like if I'm not sure how knowledgeable you are, either of you. I don't speak politics much on the anything with like people I've met online, but it's like we used to be Yugoslavia. You've heard of that, like
Yeah, yeah.
stuff. Yeah.
I mean,
So it's like
that all kicked
everything.
off when I was a teenager. Yeah,
Yeah,
so
yeah, yeah. So it's like everything that we see in like modern politics. It's sort of like what's the right word? Like just like remnants from all that conflict and all that stuff is still so super powerful that you do have these two like parties and it's like they all fall into like the remains of what these used to represent back in the day, while what they're really doing now is just like reactionary bullshit off of each other. Oh, how's swearing on the channel? Because I do tend to swear a lot, so I'll keep my.
Yeah, don't worry, you
Try
can
and keep
swear.
it.
It's fine. Yeah, swear.
Okay,
Please
cool,
swear.
cool.
Yeah,
Awesome,
swear. Yeah.
awesome. So like recently, the the HDZ or HDZ, that's like the Croatian Democratic Union Party, which is like right wing thing. That's all. I think it got like called out as in top 5 most corrupt parties in the world or something, and they lost the presidential thing. But the prime minister, just like in the UK, is like the real force. So we did get like a SDP, which is like a Social Democratic Party president, but like the prime minister is still aged. So it's all the similar stuff with like the two different like parties, but it's like a parliamentary thing like in the UK. And it's just the same stuff that happens everywhere. And it is different like in America, like what would be called right wing is like a bit different, and you can find these things, but what like universally makes it the same, I guess, is just it's corrupt beyond belief. Like no little party can make anything. It's always these two, and there's like it is a rotten system. So I don't know. I'm jumping all around the place because I don't know. As I said before, like my English starts to die down when I'm like a bit tired. So if my words don't make sense, that's all right because they usually don't, but they might make a bit less sense than usual. So I apologize.
No,
Yeah,
I think it
and
makes
don't
sense.
worry if there's any if there's anything that needs clarification, we'll definitely ask you. So, anyways,
Right,
Alan.
right.
Well, yeah. So the problem, like I say, with people with blind obedience, like just voting because that is their party that they vote for, tends to be that politics, certainly in the UK and the USA, has drifted so far to the right that if you even dare say like a policy of, oh, maybe we should like think about helping people get an education, you're a communist. You know,
Yeah.
it's really weird. Like Reagan and Thatcher were seen as like right wing in their time, but if you enacted the policies that they enacted back then, you'd be seen as a like socialist communist demagogue. It's so strange, and because these parties
So,
aren't representing people anymore, people don't feel connected to the political system. So, I mean, in the UK, certainly they're starting to look for other parties that do say what they're thinking. And here in the UK, we've got the Reform Party, which is basically kick all foreigners out of the UK. And a lot of people believe that that's the best way to go, sadly.
so Alan, this is something I actually didn't know. So, in the US, we always thought that like everyone in Europe was a little bit to the left than we are. But from what I'm hearing from you is that UK has actually swung more right these past 10 years, maybe?
Oh man, I mean, it's more than 10 years. Like ever since. So, like, how much do you know about Margaret Thatcher?
I mean, I knew about Thatcherism and
Yeah, yeah.
the
So
Falkland Wars. I mean, that's most Americans don't even know about it, but I do know about Thatcherism and the Falkland Wars. So that's all.
so Thatcherism
Right.
kind of went hand in hand with Reaganomics. You know, Thatcher's like if you look, let's take the UK train network. Like it used to be British Rail, and it was owned by the government. So you could say, you know, a socialist policy. So Margaret Thatcher needed money, needed funds. So one of the things she loved doing was taking public assets and privatizing them. And it was always under the guise that if you, you know, like Elon Musk, if you get rid of your assets given to private sector, they will run them efficiently because they're not a government pot to just pour money into. They will find the most efficient ways of doing things, and you will get the best service by privatising the railway network. Now, when British Rail was privatised, it was one of the better rail networks in Europe after decades of being private. And it's interesting, the railway networks were privatised, but you had no choice. So, you've got Network East runs here and Network West runs here, and Virgin Rail have this system over here. So they have a monopoly.
Yeah,
They can
yeah,
charge whatever they
yeah.
want and
Localized
provide.
monopoly, those are called in
Yeah.
economics. Yeah.
So you can provide a rubbish service. You can charge as much as you want, and no one has. They can't go, oh well, I'll just use this service instead. So what we've ended up with is the worst train service in Europe, but like the most expensive.
Wow. So she lied to the people. She didn't really privatize then, but people
No,
thought she was privatized. But anyway, Thomas looks like he's got something to say about this.
yeah,
Yeah, please go ahead,
Yeah,
Thomas.
it's just a remark, so I'll just quickly shoot because I find it funny. The first time I heard who she was, and I think it's a hilarious way to learn because it was a long time ago. I was listening to, because I think I watched Wizard of Oz or seen it on TV, and I went to YouTube to Google Ding Dong, the witch is dead. And all the comments were about Margaret Thatcher. So I had to learn who she was. So that's how I
yeah.
got exposed to who she was.
When she died, everyone downloaded "Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead" to the point that it got to #1.
Wow. So she wasn't liked in the UK.
She was. I mean, I hate her, right? I think she was like she really caused the demise of the UK. Like, she's led to where we are now. But you get a 50-50 love-hate thing in the country. Like, you either absolutely despise woman or you think she was fantastic. Like, what she did for a lot of people, she provided a lot of people with a chance to buy a house, or that's how she's remembered. Because we had councils owned houses. You would rent them, the council would keep them up, the rents were low, so people could afford to rent a house and still have a decent life. There was a policy of you could buy your council house and the council would then use that money to build some new housing. So they get rid of an older house that would need more upkeep, and then they could build like newer houses which needed less upkeep. So it was a good system. What Margaret Thatcher did was she eased the restrictions of what it took to buy a council house. Now, people believe that she created this system where everyone now owns houses, but it's not true. Like, less people own houses in the UK now than back then. What it did was, again, it transferred a lot of cheap housing to the private sector, which is then rented out by landlords. And it's a massive cost to the government, because if people aren't working, they have to give them housing subsidies. Where do those housing subsidies go? They go to private landlords now, where they used to go back into the council. So if they own the houses, you're paying a subsidy for that rent, but that rent's going straight back to the government. Whereas now it goes into the pockets of private landlords.
That's so interesting hearing you talk about it, because this whole housing council stuff, I don't think we have it in the US. So it's just like I'm like trying to wrap my head around it. It's like, so in a way, before Thatcher, the UK was more socialist than the US. Like, there's a lot of these policies.
Massively so.
Wow. Like, it's so funny because like the UK and the US are so similar in so many ways, but in a certain funny way, it's like almost the UK and the US grew more similar after Reagan and Thatcher. Before that, the UK was actually way more European.
Yeah, absolutely. And
wow, like housing councils, I'm like, that like what goes over my head as an American.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so when I first became a dad, like, I rented a house from a housing trust, the Guinness Trust, and the rent for that house was £250 a month. Like, rents now for the same house. So this is 2002. This would have been £250 a month from like a housing association. Rents now, if you rent that from a private landlord, you'd be paying £1,100-1,200 a month.
Yeah.
So that's in the space of 23 years. It's people can't afford to live people can't afford. You know, you've got like in London, you've always had people like will house share. So you know, like you have four different people living in the same house because it's cheaper that way than. But that's like countrywide now. You've got so many people that either renting out a room that they've got, or people are coming together to like our next door neighbours. They rent a house. There's like two couples living in the same house because then it makes it affordable. You know, it's and when we talk about, as I say, incel culture, you know, a lot of it is like young men have been left by the wayside because policy, when political systems just expect you to vote for them, what are they going to offer you? Nothing. So what votes did they go for? You know, and it's because the Labour Party have always thought, well, the left-leaning people will always vote for us. So who do we need to appeal to? We need to appeal to the people that vote Conservative. So we need to be more right-wing. And then they appeal to the right-wing people, you know, like offer, you know, we're going to privatise, like we're going to put fees on education. We're going to be stricter with immigration. You know, we're going to not invest in the country. We're going to carry on with conservative policies. And then what happens is people like me traditionally would go, oh, I'm going to vote Labour still because at least they're not as bad as the Conservatives. But then you get this gradual slide to the right where now, like when Jeremy Corbyn was in charge of the Labour Party, he was trying to put in policies that Conservative-led Germany put in place, you know, similar like economic policies, investing in infrastructure and business. And people were accusing him of being a communist. Yet they do it in Germany, but Germany is a Conservative-led country. That was a technically right of centre party that controls it. That's how far we've slid over to the right. And so young men, political parties don't focus on them at all. What have they got going for them? Who do they blame though? They don't blame the political system. They start to blame women.
Yes, and we'll jump to that, but I want to get Thomas's view really quickly. How is the housing market? How is homeownership in Croatia?
Oh, so it's super hard. It's I think a very similar thing. So it's like just from everything that I talk to people like my age, it's just all memes about like how it used to be like a thing to own houses.
Wow.
So it's quite similar. But if it's okay, so I think I just got like a random call and it sort of screwed up my audio, so I can hear you barely. So if I can just like go away and come back.
Yeah, sure. Come back, and then
just to fix the audio, and you can keep talking if that's okay.
Thomas, when you come back, me and Alan will be talking about the manosphere. So just know that's the sort of the topic we're going to talk
awesome.
about.
I've got stuff to say about that one as well.
Yep. And for people watching, Thomas will be back later. But the reason I wanted to do this talk was because I know Thomas and Alan both have very unique views, and you know, I'm a guy that you guys have followed my channel. You guys know. I, just like what Alan said earlier, I feel for people in the manosphere, man. And a lot of manosphere thought, I think there's a lot of stuff that's worth considering. But part of what my channel wants to do, I want to dissect, okay, what the heck is wrong with society to cause all this stuff, right? And that's sort of why I wanted to bring these two on. So, you know, I wanted to start with more broad stuff, and we mentioned some of the broad stuff, but we can continue with that as sort of apply the lens of manosphere. And it's not just young men, it's young people in general. They work too hard and not enough payoff. Like, I have someone right now, I'm not going to say which big tech company she's working on, but she's at a big tech company, and she like gets off sometimes at like 10 or 11. It's like, how's that woman ever going to start a family? You know, like, so it's not just young men, but I will say exactly like Alan said, there's an extra underserving of young men in many sectors, in many politicians, in many parts of the media. Like, they feel like, oh, there's this unfortunate narrative that, like, you know, oh yeah, masculinity, patriarchy. So then it's like, oh, let's overcompensate by not understanding that, okay, like, a kid who's like 14 and lost in life, that person is not contributing to the fucking Patriot. You know, like you got to
Yeah.
understand where people are in life, and everyone's human. Everyone needs a little bit of support, okay? Just because, like 100 years ago, people were stoning people, like you can't apply that lens now. And so, long story short, I gave a little rant, but young men in general need support. They need help. And maybe what we're doing here, what I used to do on this channel, a voice for men, just a voice for people to kind of feel sympathy and empathy towards everyone.
Yeah, well, like I said, my TikTok channel started off as a martial arts channel, and then I just responded to like this weird manosphere guy, like did a video reply, and it just blew up. And before I knew it, like I was like just head deep in all of this like manosphere sort of stuff. And obviously, you have like the main players, but what you don't realize when you get on TikTok, you've got all of these little guys making content and like creating like a toxic kind of environment for these like young men that just feel lost in the world. But to start with, I was dunking on them. I was really like, you idiots. Like, how do you ever expect to have a relationship or a girlfriend if you're going to have these views? You're idiots, like, and I used to like just dunk on them all of the time. That was my whole content, which was very popular. And then I realized further down the line, after losing quite a lot of channels, because TikTok's a lot stricter than like YouTube in terms of what you can get away with saying about people. At least for now, we'll see what happens when it gets cold in the US.
Yeah, when Elon takes it over.
Yeah, but I kind of realized that I was preaching to the choir. So most of the people that consume my content are women. And they like it because they see a man who isn't like these other men. I get that, and it must be nice to some extent, but it's like to the point where I was then being elevated above women who have real sort of knowledge and experience of these situations. And it's like, why listening to me? I'm a guy. I don't know what you go through, and I wasn't appealing to the men. Like obviously because I was dunking on them, and it really got me to thinking about like cancel culture and just playing people off each other. This kind of rage baiting stuff that I was involved in myself. Is that it does nothing. Like with just the real bit that opened my eyes. We had a lot of blowback for this, like trans like drag story time. That's it. It was drag time story time that was going on in the UK. Family events organised where a drag artist would read stories to children. And what made me go, oh my God, this is just stupid, was there were these guys from a right-wing GBT news channel organised a protest outside this theatre where, these events happened. There was a counter-protest organised by more left-leaning liberal people who turned up, and then there was this YouTube journalist who wasn't one way or the other, went to the actual people running the theatre and asked them, when is the drag time story time? They said, well, we're not doing it this year. Like that's at this other venue. And it's like all of these people like raging and shouting and screaming at each other over something that wasn't even happening. And I thought, my God, that's just worldwide. That's on everything at the moment. Like people are just screaming at each other. Nobody is interested in listening to the other people. And I think it's done on purpose. I think, it's so easy when you've got people screaming at each other, the political elite, the, oligarchs like funding it all, don't need to worry about what, because if you don't get voted, you don't get in. But if you're not worried about what you're voting for and you're just voting for your team,
yeah, your one single issue that you're
change.
taught to care about.
Yeah.
The one single issue planted in your brain that you're taught to care about.
Like the trans issue, trans people make up, I don't know, it's something like 0.2% of the population.
Yeah, less than 1%.
Less than 1%, yeah. And the people that go out and vote based on that alone. You know, like, oh, so how's it going to affect your income? Uh, well, at least what they see is a man won't be able to use a bathroom. But how's it going to affect you as a person? How's it going to make your life better? Well, my daughter will be safer. Will she? Who's she more likely to be assaulted by? A normal guy or this 1%, less than 1% of the population? You know, like what policies are being put in place to protect your daughter? You know, it's a weird notion. It works brilliantly. Just get people focused on these things that have no impact in your life. Again, the UK Reform Party. I had discussions with people, and again, I got a bit too heated, and I was not really listening to their worries and fears, and I was just kind of blown away by how stupid it is. Because like, we're going to vote reform, then this country will be good. Why? We're going to stop funding like asylum seekers coming in here. Okay, how much money do we spend on asylum? Well, it's a lot. Is it? How much? Like, and when reform get in, what are they going to do to make your life better? Well, we won't have foreigners anymore. Well, we will. We're always going to have foreigners here because we rely on them. And, but let's say we get rid of asylum seekers. What are we actually, how is that going to affect you? We'll have more money to spend on roads. How much money? They don't even know. They've never looked into the figures. They don't realise that it's such a tiny amount of our budget goes on paying for the support of asylum seekers that even if you got all of that money, it's a drop in the ocean of what we spend every year.
Yeah, I'm looking at the data right now, and they account for about 6% of immigrants. Asylum seekers are about 6% of immigrants in the UK.
So the funding that they take up is going to be just nothing compared to, like what we're spending keeping the country going.
Yeah, and then by 2023, they're at 14%. So, see, what's interesting about what Alan's talking about, and this is something that I think I've known for many years, but I only starting last year realized, okay, we got to address this. It's just that there's this disconnect between what you read, what you hear, and let's go actually find out whether that's true or not. I don't know where in society people lost that. The thing, the story I brought up on this channel before that I'll just share with YouTube briefly. There's a person I call Pooh Bear, and he the reason I call him Pooh Bear is because he's like addicted to sugar, and he's also he's big. So he's Pooh Bear. He's really funny, but he doesn't like that nickname. Anyways, I don't know how. Probably because jiu-jitsu guys love to fall into like conspiracy theories. It's like part of being a jiu-jitsu guy. So and Brazilian jiu-jitsu, not Japanese jiu-jitsu like Tomis right here. Yeah. So he picked up this book, and I'll have to send you guys the book later. I don't want to promote this stupid ass book, but it's a book that's like filled with conspiracy theories. Obviously not a fact-checked book, but it's like, yeah, like you can get free money, you can like discharge your debts, you can like improve your credit by all these secret things you can write on different forums and stuff like that. It's like obviously this dude's just writing for like fun, he's like, and the added kicker of it was the guy who's giving you finance advice was jailed for tax fraud. Yeah, trust this fucking dude, But Pooh Bear just took this fucking book and it became like gospel to him. He would just like, before I had to cut him off from my life, every time he would quote it, he would like memorize it. And it got to the point, you two know, and people who watch this channel know, like I'm taking a course on taxes. Like I'm actually trying to study this stuff because it's part of adulting. It'll only help you to know about the tax code. And he starts quoting the book. He's like, yeah, but like according to the U.S. Fed, for those of you who don't know, the U.S. Fed, they different divisions, they control different things that affect the interest rate. Okay, like so. It's got nothing to do with taxes. But he's like, yeah, like there's a secret passage in the U.S. Fed that says you don't have to pay your taxes ever. And I was like, enough is enough, man. stop fucking like talking to me about this shit. Like when I'm actively studying for this stuff and like potentially people might pay me to do your taxes, I can't ethically accept this bullshit anymore. And then I told him like, did you look up this fucking author? You can tell I'm passionate about this, right? Because like I just anyways, we'll finish the story. I'm like, did you look up the author? The author got jailed for tax fraud and you're taking tax advice from him? But that was such a moment. I'm like, this guy was I kept him in like this guy was in my inner circle for a while, you know, because under COVID lockdown, like sometimes you just like take friends wherever you get, right? But like he probably wouldn't have been in my inner circle if this were any other situation. But I'm like, if someone around me who I encourage critical thinking, if someone around me fell this deep into some stupid rabbit hole, it's like, wow, like what are people in this world doing? That was one of those moments. I'm like, I stepped away from this channel for a while. I'm like, okay, I have other things, including martial arts and stuff like that I really care about. But like this ability to get people to think and question, even if I only reach 1% of my audience, I need to remind people. And so that's sort of where all this came from. That's why I wanted to bring on you two. So to introduce people, by the way, for those of you watching now or later, Alan's in the UK, but what's cool about Alan is he's a dad. He looks my age, but he's a dad. He's a little older. You have two daughters?
Two daughters, yeah.
You have two daughters, and he has a grandkid now. And then Thomas is in Croatia. What's cool about Thomas is Croatia, as he said in the beginning, former Yugoslavian country. So like they're Europe, but they're not completely Europe. They've had a different system. You could sort of say like Thomas is like if you took like Jerry if he stayed in China and our man Alan and put them together with a little hint of like current Jerry. Like that's what Yugoslavian countries are. So it's like we have three very interesting views, and that's why I wanted to bring you guys. And Thomas is a very deep thinker too. You both very deep thinkers. So anyways, yeah, that's my little rant. But basically the whole point is where did it go? And I think what we're hearing from Alan is probably what I'm feeling too, is that obviously this was all on purpose. If politicians can get us to hate each other and fight each other and point fingers at each other, we're not going to keep them in check. You know, how can you get away in a democracy by not doing your job? Well, get the voters to be dumb, for lack of a better word, you know?
I think it just shows how successful like weaponizing emotion can be, because like I don't know exactly like how we got here, but it feels like, you know, when you're like 15 or something and you would like for the first time get exposed to people disagreeing with you on like things that you find important, and then you get like that gut feeling where you feel like it's like, ooh, you get shaky, you've never argued with someone before about it. It's like it almost feels like just the global scale of politics, especially on the internet, it just like so successfully weaponized that feeling. And I feel like even like during COVID, when like human connection was like all sorts of screwed up, like people would fall back on YouTube channels that sort of like preach what they already agree with, or sort of like just get closed in echo chambers, regardless of like the information that they're saying, is it correct or not, like just regardless. And it's like it sort of like feels at least that it preyed upon that thing and sort of like furthered that feeling. When like you hear somebody disagree, I bet that a lot of people still feel a bit of that like, ugh, just like negative feeling, while it shouldn't really be that way. Like at the end of the day, it's like it's just going to be one conversation. Even if you don't like the person, it's just going to go away. You're going to live tomorrow and it's just going to all be fine. And like not getting married to beliefs is so important. But it feels like just that like emotional state, like it got weaponized by like politicians all around everywhere. And that's like why I feel this sort of like arguments and just like nasty views and reactionary stuff is happening online, especially like the fact that you're hidden behind like a keyboard doesn't help at all. But it's like
Well, arguing's addictive as well, isn't it? That's the thing. Arguing is addictive.
Exactly. Right. But it's
It
just like
gives someone a sense of purpose.
yeah, exactly. But I feel like trying to just like ignore that thing and just be like, oh, this is a human being right in front of me. And in most cases, I'd say just people genuinely do want better stuff for the world, even if you totally disagree with them. It's like they're in most cases are coming from a genuine place. So it's like just push down the emotion and just like have a nice conversation. It's like, of course, there's extremities, there's extreme idiots that like should shut up, but it's like that's not gonna be your normal experience. That's if you're like online and searching for the dumbest thing and then arguing with like the dumbest thing. But like in a coffee shop, like I have so many friends that are quite different in political views than I am, but it's like what we're gonna do now. Like we're still gonna hang out and talk about the stuff when we can, if it's not like annoying to other people when we start opening politics. But it's like,
I think that's an important thing. That if I could just interject there, Tom,
yeah,
that is an important thing that I came to this like realization about 2012, 13, where I'd get into debates online and I'd think if I show people the links, if I show them the data, that they will then turn around and go, oh yeah, it's true. But what you don't realize is online, you can just go and Google stuff that fits your bias. And so actual interaction, like you say, in a coffee shop talking. And that's when
yeah,
I decided I'm not going to waste my time trying to convince people online
yeah,
unless I see them in person, because it's that conversations that you have in person are what can get people to think. And that's the
absolutely.
difference. Like where you can just go away and Google, hang on, what is it I want to believe? And then you Google
Yeah,
what is it I want to believe? You're never going to change anyone's opinion that way.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
and there's a level. So the word I'm using, there's a level of maturity, right? And some people have that maturity where even online, if they get into a good debate, they might be able to look at the sources, look at their own logical reasoning. That's rare. And, I'm sure very few people can do that because it's online, right? Like you said, the lack of the face
Yeah.
to face, you don't see the person. Now, some people do have the maturity where face to face they might do it. But I will say, even face to face, it's probably not as mature as people, as we ideally want society to be, right? And
No,
that's
I
that.
mean it's never. But you can put seeds into people. And
Yeah,
I have
you can
seen
put seeds
people.
into people. Yes, face to face.
I've seen people that were ardent conservative voters. Like I've had conversations with them. We talk, and I've seen them develop over 4 or 5 years, where they've then gone and done a total 180 and realised that actually they don't have my best interest at heart. Actually, when they're in power, things do get worse. Like all I've been listening to is what people are telling me. I've not actually been thinking for myself. Now, he thinks that he did that all on his own. He doesn't realise that actually it was me kind of guiding him and pushing him and just planting those little seeds in his head to make him really think about this stuff.
Right. And
Yeah, and oh, Thomas, go
oh,
ahead. Thomas, go ahead.
oh yeah, yeah, it's all right. Like you can go ahead if you want.
The one thing that I noticed, and this was something that I think this is a uniquely American thing. UK might be similar, I don't know, but in the US, starting in like high school, probably middle school too, but most starting high school, it's like they always wanted you to have a view. And I think that's stupid. I
Yeah.
would
Yeah,
always be like, well, I don't want to speak out. It's not that I'm dumb or I don't like you, teacher, I don't like the subject. I haven't formed my fucking opinion yet. Like,
that's a
this is
good
one of
point.
my biggest pet peeves in like
That's a
American
good point.
society. They always like, sometimes they'll call on the student that's quiet. Why force him to speak out? Maybe he's thinking. Maybe he's
Yeah.
formulating. Maybe he's going to take 2 weeks to find a good idea. But
Yeah.
you're telling him that's not good. That's how I felt in high school and college. College was annoying, man. I went to an Ivy League school, so obviously it was supposed to be like the best of the best. But lecture would happen before the professor even finished his point. Hands would go up, and I'd be looking at these kids. I'm like, either you are all like Einsteinian level IQ, or you're just still of that mentality. I have to speak up to look smart because you haven't processed everything the professor hadn't even finished speaking.
Yeah,
But like, I don't know if it is the case of the UK, Croatia, probably not like that. But like American culture emphasize you have to speak, you have to be loud, you have to have a view. It's like, how about
Right.
learn to shut the fuck up? Like, that's a good Asian trait. You know, in Asian culture, sometimes the smartest people know when to talk. They're not talking all the time. But like, it is a good thing to learn from Asia. Formulate your ideas first. Critical thinking doesn't happen immediately. You need to train it. And I think the American system, unfortunately, just I have to have a view or they're not, you
Yeah.
know. Or
I think
it's the
the
same with
media.
sorry, Al, I'm just going to finish this one point, bro. It's the same
Yeah.
with voting. I have to vote. I have to vote. It's like if you don't know what you're voting, don't vote. I know that's controversial, but it's better not to vote than to vote out of ignorance. If you vote as a voter, you better understand all the issues, man.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to change what I say now and go absolutely. What you just said then, with like the voting, is so true. Like the UK had the Brexit vote, and there were so many people that voted. Like one of my ex-girlfriends said she didn't really understand what it was, but somebody told her that it'd be better
Oh,
if she voted Brexit. And you're like, no, if you
oh,
don't understand it, I actually thought you should have to answer like a questionnaire before you were allowed to vote in Brexit, so that you could show that you understood what it was you were voting for. Because there were so many
my
people that voted that didn't have a clue what they were voting for, and they've had this catastrophic effect on this country. You know, we've lost more money in the short time we've been out of Europe than we ever paid into Europe. And it's just mental that people have done that. But I'll just go back quickly. Sorry, Ty. I'll just go back quickly and say about my point is no, it is kind of the same in the UK about expressing opinions. And I think that the media also has a lot to do with this as well, because it's always a 50-50, you know, like, well, we get this person on to discuss this thing with this person. And it's like sometimes it's like, no, you know, like not everybody's opinion ranks the same. You know, let's get Ja Rule on to talk about like terrorism. Why? you know, like, that was always my famous one. I think was it Chris Rock who said that? You know, like after 9/11, let's go and talk to Ja Rule. Why the fuck are we talking to Ja Rule about like a terrorist attack? Anyway, go on, Ty. Sorry.
yeah. I was just gonna just agree with all of that and just say, what happened to the I don't know? Like we the I don't know is a perfectly fine response, and in fact, not knowing and honestly saying that you don't know, that's the root of knowledge. That's how you learn. It's like you said, Jerry, like here it's different, but we do still have that, like everybody, especially on the internet, when you get into these like factions and stuff, you do want to argue. But it's like sometimes if you genuinely don't know, that's fine. And I understand why that's like feels hard, because everything seems that it like not incentivizing saying that you don't know. But that's totally fine. Like even if it's not about voting, even if we put it back into like just that coffee shop and you're talking to somebody and like you're genuinely interested in what's being said, but you don't know about this, you just say you don't know. That's how you learn. And it feels like that's not incentivized. And it's just again preying like on that like emotional stuff. Like you said in the classroom example, like doesn't that like push that emotional problem that can be weaponized even further, because it's like, oh, you don't have you don't know, oh, you don't, so you're gonna have a gut reaction, you're gonna feel negatively, especially if you're not like arguing usually. Next time you're gonna feel that again, and that shit sucks. Like that's not how anything should be done ever. Like science wouldn't work if you didn't go from I have no idea what the fuck this is, let's slowly figure it out, and like fuck opinions, let's just inductively look at the data. And there's a reason why that works. Like you, come on. So even in all aspects, just like talking in a coffee shop, I don't know is a totally fine response. And in fact, like it's it'd be a much better response than a lot of things I've heard from
Oh
people.
yeah.
But it's all right. No, like that shouldn't be punished. But it seems like, especially on the internet, like, oh, if you don't have an opinion and you do chime in and just say I have no idea, it's like you're gonna be like metaphorically shot down like immediately. So, That sucks, man.
Yeah, and I think this is, if people can have one takeaway, it's okay to not know. It really is okay. And not only is it okay to not know, it's okay not to have an opinion. You don't need an opinion on everything. And dig into why you don't have an opinion. Is it because you don't care? Is it because you don't know enough? Right? It's all about self-reflection. So, like, why don't you have an opinion? Is it because you don't care? Is it because you don't know? Is it because both? It's okay. Like, if it's something you do actually care about, but you don't know, okay, how can you get to know about it more, right? But the automatic reaction shouldn't be, oh, you know, like, that was like a Tai Chi moment. Like, you know,
I think when you talk about questioning, that's the perfect, like, that is what we need to get across to people again, is to question like yourself a lot, like your beliefs, why you think that way. And I'll give you a great example. I had a friend who went into life coaching, and he basically said, all you do is you get the people to answer their own questions. So you ask them questions. So, like, let's take me. I always thought I wanted to travel. Why have I never traveled? Well, I had kids at a young age, so it was really difficult to. But could you still have done it? Well, yeah, I could have done it, but it would have been a lot. And plus, my ex-missus really hated the thought of me doing stuff with them. So for me to get a permission to go out would have been. But could you have, like, still travelled if you wanted to? Was there a way around it? Well, yeah, I suppose, like, if I'd waited for them to be a bit older, I could have got them to ask their mum, then she would have been less likely to, like, and so when I got through all of these questions, I thought to myself, oh, I'm not as bothered about traveling as I thought I was. That if I'd really wanted it, I would have done it, but I didn't. So, and I was a lot happier with myself about it. And I think you could do that in all aspects of life. And I think going to these, back to the manosphere, if some of these incels like actually ask themselves some questions like, why am I following this man? Because he gives me excuses for why my life is the way it is. Right. If I lived a life like this man, would I be happier? No, because this man is very angry at women. He doesn't seem to have formed a decent relationship with any. Why am I following this man? Well, because there are aspects about myself that I haven't addressed. Like, if like you say, if we just keep asking ourselves these questions all over. I've got all of these men friends. We hang around and we just slug off women all the time. Am I happy? No. What would make me happier? To have an actual relationship with a woman. What's more likely to get your relationship with a woman? If I actually listen to one, instead of shouting at her that I'm an alpha male and she should be subservient to me. Right, okay. Maybe I should listen to men that actually know how to get a girlfriend and sustain a relationship before carrying on with my life. Questions, like you said, just
yeah.
keep asking yourself questions.
The funny thing, it's like, I love how you phrase it. This is why it's important. Whatever you want to do, if you want to study martial arts, you want to do whatever, the more you hear it explained to you from different people, the more it's going to make sense to you, right? I always say, just like, you got to self-reflect. But the way that Alan kind of brought that methodology out, that was a great way of describing it. Like, he's basically applying the Socratic principle, the Socratic method to himself, or if you're an Elon fan, he's using Elon's first principles, right? It's the same thing. You gotta look at certain things. Whatever, the manosphere is big, right? There's like the incel people, sometimes they call themselves the black pill guys, there's the red pill guys, there's the blue pill guys, whatever. But like, a very combining theme of a lot of the manosphere is that there's too much of, let's take the burden off ourselves, and it's all this, it's all women, it's all society, it's all blah blah blah, it's all AI, it's all this. But it's like, you have to, again, this is an east-west divide too, which Tomis is in the middle, which is interesting. I personally think that there's certain aspects of both culture that sometimes either puts too much burden on the individual or too much burden on the society. I see that, I get it, but you can't then overreact and overcompensate the other way. So, taking Alan's example, okay, all right, let's say all your life you were told you were this, and that. Okay, so like you learned a certain way to interact with women, and then it wasn't the right way. Now, is it time to just blame women? Is it time to blame society? Or can you still look at yourself? A perfect example, for example, the guy Pooh Bear that I talked about, right? He was very, very deep into these manosphere rabbit holes. And, I think he started out with the red pill, but the unfortunate thing is when you get too deep into the manosphere, it's like a funnel that funnels you down into the black pill, aka incel, right? So like the problem with manosphere stuff is that no matter where you start out with, it eventually gives you incel vibes. That's the unfortunate truth about the manosphere. So like I remember, he would always quote, I'm sure a lot of the red pill guys say this, like this is a Tate type quote, right? So it's not a black pill, not an incel quote, but it's an Andrew Tate type quote. He'd be like, yeah, but like, like if you were Brad Pitt, she'd be like coming at your door and like asking you out. It's like, yeah, but you're not Brad Pitt, bro. You're not Brad Pitt. So reflect on that. Don't just quote it. Reflect on that. Why are you not Brad Pitt? Can you be Brad Pitt? Can you be something? Can you be the best, like your version of Brad Pitt? They never think. They just keep quoting that. The other quote that, by the way, is not true, but I'm going to quote this. You hear red pill people talk about this all the time. They're like, yeah, well, your ancestors were the strongest. It's always that. Like, your ancestors survived, like, famines. It's like, that's actually not true either. If you look at the genetic code of any population, it's not just the most physically dominant people that survive. In fact, alpha males, the quote unquote alpha, again, there's another fallacy. I have to go on this weave. We call it a Trump weave. I have to weave here. This is a fallacy called fallacy by applying nature. You can't always apply the animal kingdom to humans because humans are much more complex. So first of all, you have to recognize that fallacy. But okay, let's humor that fallacy. If you look at some of our closest relatives, relatives that have hierarchies in the animal kingdom, the alpha males often are the most stressed out. So like we have this like pedestalization of that like leader on top, but usually that leader on top, even if he were the emperor of China, is like stressed out and depending on the situation gets the worst of the worst, like has no kids or gets executed, whatever. The point is this whole like red pill thing of like we're all descended of like the toughest, strongest physical. That's bullshit. Because survival of the fittest does not mean fittest as in physically fit. It means whatever adapts you to what's going on in the world at the time. So survival of the fittest sometimes could mean the smartest. Sometimes could mean the most scheming. Sometimes could mean the strongest. Sometimes could be the most skilled. But it depends on the society, depends on the environment, depends on a lot of factors. So you can't be BSing this point of, yeah, dude, like your ancestors, like all the women wanted to suck the dick, like that is not what survival of the fittest actually means. So like, but see, you see how I'm applying this? Like you have to examine this. You can't just, oh, this fulfills my belief. Let me just like quote it because like it justifies everything. Yeah, like my ancestor was getting like 100 girls. Why am I not getting 100 girls? Oh, it's because of the society. It's because of women. It's because of the deep state. Whatever the fuck you want to apply to like project your. And again, guys, remember, it's okay not to always put the responsibility on yourself, but you have to do it in an intelligent way. Think through it. So that's my rant.
It's a good one.
Yeah,
you go.
Well, I was going I think we can trace most of the manosphere back to actually Dawkins, and a lot of what you're talking about there, you can trace back to his like sort of the selfish gene that he talks about. As humans, we're all inherently selfish because that's how we survived. And it's like, well, actually, it's not because we are. When we look at the animals we were competing against, we are very, very weak. How did we become the dominant species on Earth? By cooperating with each other, by having, getting the best out of the strengths of everyone. So you had your meatheads, you had your thinkers, you had your people that were good socially. You know, all of these qualities we used to our advantage as a collective, as a whole. You know, the whole selfish gene thing that, for a start, that kind of thought about genes and their effect they have on us has long gone out the window. We've realised that it's a load of nonsense. But for another thing, just that whole idea of we survive because we're selfish is nonsense. We survive because we could form communities, and I think that's what we need to remember.
And you know what's funny about the whole survival of the fittest thing? Like the natural selection thing, like sometimes what it's not the smartest survive, the fittest. It's like, is your color of your fur white, so you blend with the snow? Oh, you survive. That's not like being or being like a genius. It's just like a random mutation. These rabbits got white fur. They were hard to get picked up by birds, and then they survived. That's it. Like that's not like that's the fittest, but it's just something as arbitrary as the color of the fur. So that's also like, and you know the whole thing about the nature fallacy with the alpha thing, like first of all, that is like a appeal to nature fallacy where like we're not what these like wolves or whatever the manosphere like got stuck to. But even further than that, like wolves don't work that way either. Like it wouldn't be true even if they did work that way, it wouldn't be true. But it turns out that the whole alpha male thing isn't even true for wolves at all. That was like a retracted thing that ended up not
There's a
being true.
study on
But even if
captive
it
wolves.
were, yeah, and even if it were, that's not applicable to humans. So it's like the whole nature fallacy thing is like nope, big nope. So it's interesting. It's
Yeah.
fascinating stuff.
And to add to that, for example, when they actually looked at the genetic population of, let's say, a clan of some kind of ape that has a hierarchy, right? What they found is if you look at the children, the quote unquote non alpha males snuck their genes through too, right? Because
Yeah.
we obviously have these biases, and maybe in captivity it's a certain way, but if you actually look at the population, it's much more nuanced. It's not like that guy who leads the ape tribe is the only one that like they like this is really fun. I remember reading that. I'm like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That seems like a much more nuanced thing. Like sometimes the females will go off with some of the quote unquote non-alpha males. So it's like you just like whenever you hear any of this stuff, like why don't you go look at the study? I know that seems hard to some people, but I'm telling you, if you actually read the studies, it's actually kind of fun. And then again, this goes back to my rant about education. Like this is the stuff that the interest that they should have built for us. But
Yeah.
Thomas and I have talked about it. When I went to school, it was Bush, right? And even in Yugoslavia, they have like comic books and cartoons making fun of Bush. So like Bush had such a negative effect worldwide. But when I went to school, Bush had something called No Child Left Behind, which basically added so many tests to the entire national education system. And then to force compliance, if you didn't pass certain tests, you would get a lot of your electives cut budget wise. So like I was talking to my parents the other day. I'm like, I think a lot of the quote unquote dumbing down slash lack of actual critical thinking in American society started with Bush. Like Bush was such a bad president. You know, I
I'll be back
don't
now.
play sides on this. Okay, Biden was probably even worse than Bush, but Bush started America's downfall. It's like, and you could trace it with a lot of things. He did a lot of bad things, but he really messed up America's education system. And then suddenly the joke is, I don't know if you ever heard this, Alan, but it wasn't just No Child Left Behind. Teachers called it No Teacher Left Standing.
But I mean, we have something similar in the UK, and it's kind of like you as a teacher are kind of judged successful by the amount of like GCSEs that your students pass, or like you say, these other little tests at the other years that they get. So all the focus is on getting them to pass the criteria. There's no focus on actually getting your kids to think.
Yeah.
And in terms of that no kid left behind, the irony of it is that a lot of kids were left behind because of that way of thinking. Because if you, it's all about metrics. You focus on the ones that you know are going to hit. Well, if I get 60% of my class to pass this, then that's good. So I'll focus on the 60% that are going to get, and all of these sort of slightly less intelligent kids are going to get left behind because I'm not going to put any effort into them because I know they're going to fail anyway.
Yeah.
And these kinds of ways of doing things actually leave a lot of kids in a much worse position than if you'd have just left them. You know, education's supposed to be fun. Let kids learn for the point of being fun. If they want to go into like college and university at another level, then that's when we have to start saying, okay, let's see how you've applied yourself.
Yeah, I 100% agree. What I found out was that we moved during the end of my middle school. So I went to a different high school than the one that I should have gone to. But the one that I should have gone to, it was a public school, but my family's in the DC area, Washington DC area. So that school is notorious. It had a lot of like kids of like, politicians and kids of like, influential public figures.
Yeah.
So because of the way the school district was drawn, it brought in certain kids from the hood. So like that was out of the school's control. So what the school tried to do was school almost tried to create like a segregation. And part of it was exactly like what you said, Alan. It's like, well, these kids from the hood obviously aren't even going to try to pass these tests. Okay, let's just like leave them behind even more so we can like get the majority of our students and then we can get all the funding. So it's like, it does create like a perverse incentive. And the other really crazy incentive it created, and I only learned about this because I have a very good family friend from like very old money. And so like she treats me like a family friend. So she tells me this. And I had inklings of that. Inkling is probably the wrong word, but I had guesses of this when I was in college because I went to a very elite college, but basically because so much of it was about test taking and cramming and not actually learning, people with money, again, it goes back to that again, the wealth disparity, they would always be able to hack the system. And part of it was, let's go to this psychiatrist that's chill, get diagnosed with ADHD. Yeah. And then I get to take this performance enhancing drug. Or even better, let's go to this psychologist that, well, you give me extra money and then I'll say you have dyslexia. So then you get double, triple the time on tests. And I knew of people who did that. But when this family friend from old money told me about it, then I realized the extent of it, that like the really rich people who knew how to cheat the system would cheat the system. So it further created this divide.
Yeah. But you just get like tutors, even just basically parents that can afford tutors for their kids.
That too, yes, tutoring, grades, yes.
Yeah, and like my youngest was struggling with like English at school, like English lessons, and so what the school did was send her to more classes, more intensive classes where they really focused on it. And she went from getting like a poor grade to like a decent passing grade at GCSE because of that focus. Well, that was great that she had access to that at that school, but there are parents out there that know, that can afford to get the best tutors and they understand how the scoring system works. So again, they're not teaching a kid how to think. They're going, if you write this will get you extra marks. All right? You don't even have to really understand it. Just write out this. Just answer the question in this way. Just break the question apart and answer it in these ways to build your argument. You don't even have to be right. You'll get the points for it. So they don't understand. They're doing it paint by numbers. They're not understanding how to do it. And again, my ex-girlfriend, who was a teacher, she understood how to school the system to get her kids into the best schools rather than, her daughter failed the entrance exam into this like decent grammar school. So she went to see her daughter's teacher. They put in an appeal. They got it rescored. And then they got her in under some other um, policy that the school had. But she knew all that because she was in that system. You know, if you're just an average kid who failed that test, you don't go to that school now because your parents don't know all of these little things that you can do to push you into it. And it's the whole system. It's what I like about the Denmark system for education. You know, kids get allocated a certain amount of money for their education. It's not more funding will go to this school or parents can send their kids to a private school. It's no, all kids in this country get X amount spent on their education. So that is a way of ensuring that no kid gets left behind. Make sure that every kid is funded in the same way. And then rich people don't want their kids to be thick. So what are they going to do? They're going to put in policies in that country to make sure that education is good for everyone, because if their kid is part of that system, they want the best for their kid. If you can school a system, you don't need to improve it because I'm going to win anyway.
Oh man. Oh,
Thomas, how is the education system where you are?
oh, it sucks. Of course. Of course it has. It's like, oh, it's the same thing. It's just like get this arbitrary amount of facts, and just pass the test and keep going. And of course, like the thing is, the people who want to learn will learn anyway. So it's like, I don't know. It's actual, like there's such like a visible divide between knowing enough to pass like a test versus understanding stuff. And that sucks. Like we can all three, I'm sure, agree that like why aren't there critical thinking classes or politics classes or economy classes in schools? It's like if you can dumb down biology to like just calling it nature. Here in like middle school, in the first 4 grades, we have a subject called nature and society. And as you like advance, that's like it like divides into like history and nature. Then nature divides into biology and chemistry and physics and all that stuff. So if you can divide, if you can not divide, but like going back, if you can have that subject that like covers geography, history, nature in very simple terms for like 7 to 10-year-olds, you can do the same with everything else. Like there isn't a reason to not have like some sort of thinking class or ethics class or something like that, because like usually the argument people say is, well, that's just too complicated, we can't like teach propositional logic to 10. Well, I'm not saying that you do that. Like just if you can quote unquote dumb it down, all these vastly complex subjects like chemistry and biology, all that shit, like most grown-ups won't ever like have a proper like studied understanding of that, because you don't need to. Just like, you know what I'm trying to say, like just you can have like a basics economy or just like how money works class for depending like of course it's all like fudgeable to whatever degree. This is just like a thing that can be done, and I just don't like how that gets shut down often.
Yeah,
It's
I
like
100% agree, Thomas. Like, think about it. We're learning about matrices and we're learning about,
yeah,
calculus in high
yeah,
school. But why not learn about taxes? You know,
yeah,
I don't know how it is in the UK, Alan. The US used to have a class on civics. You learn about how to vote, you learn about local elections, federal elections, etc. But then they took the classes out. There's no more civics. The closest is if there's usually in high school you have 1 year where you study like the US government. That's like your class. But like
right.
so like the US used to have like a civics class, and they used to even have a home ec class where like you learn how to cook and stuff like that. It's like
Hey,
you're teaching us about stuff like the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain. For those of you who don't know, that's how your cell generates like energy. If you can teach
hey,
those things to high schoolers, teach them taxes.
Yeah.
Teach them basic critical thinking skills. I think those
Teaching
can be done if you
politics would
can
be the
teach the
move.
electron transport chain in high school.
Yeah. Anyway,
It's
fellas,
so
I'm gonna have to
true.
duck out because I've got
Okay.
to go and do some granddad duties.
Okay.
We'll have to do this again soon, I reckon. 'Cause it's
Yeah, Alan,
quite
thank you
good.
so much, man. And next time we'll have to talk more about you being a dad and grandpa. I think that'd be a fun
Yeah,
conversation too.
cool. Yeah, well, we'll have to do it
Absolutely.
soon, won't we? We'll get it regular. All
Yeah,
right,
definitely.
catch you all soon. See you later.
Okay,
Alan,
cool.
take
See you,
care.
Alan. But so yeah, Thomas, it's so funny that you have the same thought as I do. Like I've always wondered that. One of the stories I always tell on this channel is that I remember when I was 4, I will always remember it. I had this incident where I realized that just because something occurs together, it doesn't mean one causes the other, right? Correlation
Right.
doesn't equal causation. But why is that it took me high school to learn that saying? If a 4-year-old
Right.
in me can have that idea, I wasn't able to, of course, phrase it, but I understood it. Then, like, why can't you start teaching kids that very basic principle starting in elementary school?
Yeah. You know what's been like one of my thoughts, like somewhere in high school, it's like imagine just like a preliminary class, and it can fall into like the critical thinking or whatever, but imagine teaching kids how to study, like how to learn.
Yeah,
Because like everybody studies differently and like everybody struggles to varying degrees, but it's the same curriculum. So
yeah,
why not like have a class that like very early on just explains and gives you like I don't know what's the word, my English is like framework, basic framework, I guess,
yeah,
on like how to study. Like
yeah,
wouldn't that also be really good? Like it feels like it should be. I can't think of cons at all right now. So it's like study, you know how like some teachers on their own later on like start telling you about like how to study. Like if
yes,
you study just 15 minutes a day, like you can get, imagine like having a whole, and maybe it doesn't have to be a subject in and itself. It can maybe be like, you know, that you like in school you have a teacher that's designated to a certain class,
yeah.
like your what's the word in English we call it,
Homeroom teacher or something like that.
yeah, I
Yeah.
guess in Croatian, just for shits and giggles, it's called razrednik,
Uh,
which is just like class person, I
oh,
guess.
a
So,
razredni.
so
Mhm.
once or twice a week, you would have like that subject where your teacher, who's designated to your class, you talk about like class stuff. Like, why not from when you're 7 to 10 have that class be about like specifically studying?
Yeah.
Like, okay, so how did these grades go, and how did you learn? You tell us, and just have that be like a bit of a framework. Because I struggled with studying, like we talked, like I think like at least for myself, I openly say I'm learning to be more open about that, but I'm on the spectrum. So so I did have like troubles with like certain things with learning, and I do feel like I learned a lot of that on my own when it was kind of too late. You know, it's never too late for anything, but you could phrase it that way and not be wrong, simply because like some frameworks would have helped me so much to like get in the right zone early on. So like I can imagine how, like even if we throw out the whole spectrum thing, just for anybody
Yeah.
really, like it
Yeah.
really doesn't matter, that I don't see how that wouldn't be useful.
I
So
remember
it
in
just
high
kept me in
school,
mind.
a family friend asked me, he's like, how do you study well? And I didn't know because I didn't study well either. But I tried my best to kind of explain something. I remember I told him, don't just write down the notes. Like if the teacher gives an example, write down the example and explain it to yourself how it relates to the concept, right? But like I 100% agree with you. Like when I went to college, we had like a learning center that theoretically you could go and teach how to like keep a schedule, or like
Right.
you could learn how to take notes, but like it wasn't required and it wasn't emphasized.
Yeah.
But like what you said, let me try to find my notes real quickly. What
Oh,
you
cool.
said really really resonated with me. So in 2012 I started studying programming on the side, and the
Awesome.
teacher recommended a way of taking notes. So these are some of my notes when I, for my tax class, right?
Ooh.
But like
Oh, that's
nobody
some
ever
sexy stuff.
taught me how to take notes like this. But it's like an interaction with yourself. It's a left
Yeah.
right thing. So like
Oh,
you
that's
write down
so cool.
questions, you write down keywords on the left side, and you answer them. You expand on them on the right side.
Oh,
Nobody
that's
ever
so
taught
cool.
me notes like that ever.
Yeah, there
You know
you
how I
go.
took notes as a kid? I just
Yeah.
wrote. And sometimes, I'd have summaries or I'd have bullet points. But like that's not how the brain works. The brain wants to think of something, wants to look for something. So you almost need like an index. So when
Yeah.
you're flipping through your notes, you need an index, right? And
Right.
this improved my notes so much. Like now, you look at your notes, you're like, oh, okay, okay. What are fringe benefits? Okay, let's say I'm looking for something. Okay, let's look at that. How do you calculate the modified adjusted gross income? Like I can find my notes better. Like little things
Perfect.
like this. But like, why didn't they teach this to us in middle school, in elementary school, even? Why didn't they
Right.
teach us how to keep a schedule?
And it again, it all can be dumbed down, quote unquote, to whatever level. It's
Yeah,
like that's such a cop out in my opinion when it's like, oh, you can't, like, it's too complicated, it's like too pressure. No, it's already like everything's school is pressure already.
yeah,
So this can only relieve the pressure.
yeah,
So it's
yeah,
like, come on,
yeah.
school system, get your shit together.
Yeah, I so 100%. It's so, and that's why I'm really glad I brought you on to do this talk because you and I had the same realization, somewhere down the line. It's like we're sort of learning, but nobody taught us how to learn,
Yeah, yeah,
you
exactly.
know? So like this actually like we spent the beginning of this conversation back when Alan was on talking about critical thinking. But
Yeah.
before we even talk about critical thinking, I guess it's like, how do you even learn, right? Because,
Mhm.
obviously, even if you don't know anything, you can still build your critical thinking skills, but those two things come hand in hand. Like,
Yeah.
it's easier to critical think if you know some stuff, right? So you got to learn. So it's like, but as you learn, you also need to critical think. So, like, I think schools, besides teaching you facts, teaching you things, you have to learn how to learn and you have to learn how to critical think on top of all the stuff that like they make you do. And I think both those things, learning about how to learn and learning about how to critical think are completely void in a lot of the school
Yeah.
system now.
It's crazy, and it's so self-defeating to the whole concept of education,
Yeah.
which is so ironic. It's
Yeah.
like when you start thinking about it this way, and when like-minded people talk like this about this, it almost feels like a joke. It's so ironic that it's like almost unbelievable, but it is true,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
sad.
Yeah.
And like,
And no, go ahead. Go ahead.
oh yeah, no, no. I was just gonna say, like, there's so much improvement to be made, especially for like beginning levels of education. Like, I feel there's so much stuff that can be done, and as long as stuff like that and just like ideas don't get shut down, it can get better. But unfortunately, that seems to be a common response to this stuff. It's like, I don't know. It's like almost maybe even sometimes comes from like a good place, but inadvertently it does damage, in my opinion. Where it's like, well, maybe you're pushing too much, or whatever, but it's like that can actually be detrimental. That can actually work against what you're trying to like preserve or help, and that happens everywhere. I think like that's quite a common phenomena where from a position of like trying to make something better, you're actually hurting it, and it's good to like be aware of that phenomenon and just like think, well, maybe this applies here, maybe that applies there, and just like be vigilant about that stuff. So yeah, that's what I was gonna say. So you
Yeah.
go.
What I was going to add is that part of me, but I have to remind myself it's um this is going to go really deep, but a conspiracy theorist in me would say, "Oh my God, this was all done on purpose to make us ignorant, so we're not good voters." But then I think about all the teachers I've had, right? Most of my teachers weren't bad. Most of my teachers didn't weren't the types that didn't care. Like I think most people who have teachers will realize like teaching's not an easy job. And the
Yeah.
majority of people get into teaching because they love teaching, because they want to help the youth. It's not because they think of it as an easy job. So like I'm like I don't think all of this was because I had incompetent teachers or that I had teachers who didn't care. I did have some incompetent teachers. So then it's like, is it a systemic issue? Is it that just the education system somehow didn't catch up with where people are? I don't know. But yeah, it's easy for me to be like, oh yeah, this was done by society on purpose to
Yeah.
make our voters dumb, to make sure that we don't know how to look at the issues and analyze the issues, so then we can get manipulated by the oligarchs, as Alan said, the oligarchs.
Yeah.
But then part of it, I don't think it's that cynical. It's just somewhere along the line, the system got messed up, the education system got messed up, and we just have to figure out a way to bring it back because you live in a democracy just like I live in a democracy. A lot of our audiences live in a democracy, and as a citizen of a democracy, you have to be learned. You have to, unless you decide not to vote. But even if you don't vote, the thing is, you're still participating in a democracy. If you interact with people in your community, you're participating in a democracy. And even if you're not interacting with anyone, you're still participating. Why? Because most democracies have taxes. You're paying into
Yep.
it, right? So, like,
Yep.
the point of living in a democracy is it's your obligation. Unfortunately, I know life is tough and learning is tough, but it's your obligation to be a critical thinker and to learn.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
there's, there's certain things, okay, like if you really don't want to get married, don't get married. If you don't want to be a vegan, don't, there's things, there are choices, but
Right.
if you live in a democracy, it's not a choice. You have to be informed. You don't have to vote if you don't want to vote, but you have to be an informed critical thinker in a democracy. That is an obligation, in my opinion.
Yep. Yep. I think so too. And I think it goes back to that whole thing of like being comfortable about saying I don't know, because it feels like a lot of people sort of like, when you put it this way, I can imagine people like having a gut reaction and a gut response to that, where I don't know anybody anything and all that stuff. Like, sure, but it's like most, I feel like a lot of people who sort of come from that place do actually have opinions and do actually like have things, but it's like maybe it's those people who should be saying that they don't know certain thing to fulfill that, like the way you said, obligation of learning. Because it's like, I don't know, there's a lot of like weird fake humbleness that comes sometimes with that stuff, if that makes sense. But again, that's just like something that I'm feeling from just like different experiences. I'm not sure if how true that is. But if it's true, that certainly plays into it. And you know what's also interesting, like when you mentioned the whole, is it systematic or is it not? Like it makes me think, there's a word for that phenomena, I think, and I can't remember what it is. But it's like, when you talk to individual people, so in that case professors, and you talk to first one person, they're a good teacher, then the next one, they're all, and you talk to all of them and you realize, well, they're all coming from a good place, they're all good, but then you look at the system, it sucks. So it's like, how does that happen? And I think there is a word for it, I can't remember, like a paradox thing,
Yeah,
where it's
the
like,
way the word I would use is there's an emergence. And
yeah,
emergence is probably it's a term that gets tossed around a lot, but it just means when you put the sum of whatever
yeah,
parts
yeah,
together, there's something more,
yeah,
right? And
exactly, that's what I was thinking.
social science a lot of times studies this stuff. This studies emergence, studying an institution, studying a society, studying whatever. Like, why is it that every single person, okay, we kind of know like 99% of people are a certain way, right? It's like, but you put them together into an organization, into a group, into whatever, teachers, a school system, and suddenly the system has a lot of things that like you break it down into the individuals and it's what accounts for this basically.
Right, right. Oh, this just reminded me of another paradox. And so I don't have like a direction where I'm going with this, but I think it's just fun to share, especially
Hmm.
because you'll probably have like interesting thoughts on it. But it reminded me there's another paradox that's kind of similar to this, and I think it's called the preface paradox. And it was
Mm.
super interesting to think about. And I think it came about, so I have no idea who coined the term or the history around it. I totally forgot. But I did remember what it stands for. And it's like preface, it's called preface because, like, in a book, when you read a preface where like an author goes through like all the stuff that's going to be contented in the book, and sort of the word why they chose to call that paradox that is because when you ask a person, uh do they feel like they're wrong about like whatever they're writing, they'll probably say, well, no, I wrote this and I'm confident i- like in these facts, but I'm likely wrong about something. Like if they're humble, they'll say, well, there must be something that I'm not getting right now. But if you ask them one by one, they will not find what they're wrong about. If that maybe I'm being confusing in like
Ah.
putting, so like if you were to ask me, like Thomas, do you feel you're wrong on something? I'm gonna answer yes. But if we go one by one, like topic by topic, belief by belief, I'm most likely going to say that no, I believe this, I believe that, and I'll give reasons. But I know that I must be wrong about something. So it's not an actual paradox, but it is like a like a phenomena type thing that's
Yeah.
called the three-phase paradox, and
Oh,
that's
that's
super
interesting.
interesting to think about. And that's
Yeah.
pretty much like a similar, at least like pattern thing with
Hmm.
the like the system sucks, but then you ask a teacher by teacher by teacher, you may not find bad things. So it's like super interesting to think about that.
Oh,
I
that's
think it's called the
interesting.
three-phase.
Oh, wow.
I
Yeah,
think it's
I'm looking
called
this up right now. Preface paradox.
I think it's
Yeah.
called that.
Yeah, I like this a lot. Yeah, that makes a
So
lot of sense.
right.
That's so funny. Yeah, this is something I'll look into it more. I've never heard about this before, but like you
Yeah, I
said,
heard
you could
about it
probably see
recently.
similar analogies in a lot of things, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the one example, for example, there's a paradox where, and this is like with certain voting systems where by individual counties, let's say a certain group is underrepresented, but if
Mhm.
you add the whole country, then it actually seems like they're a little bit overrepresented. So like little
Ah,
things like this, like you break it down into the individual parts, and then you go back to the whole, and certain things just like contradict each other.
yeah, like it almost like all break down.
Yeah.
And I think it just further shows how us as humans are so obsessed with clean patterns and just like clean ideas and just like mutually exclusive things like A or B.
Yeah.
So A has to be A, it's not B. But reality is so much more complex and so much more like confusing because it is what it is, and we are trying to like describe it and put it in little boxes that make sense,
Yeah.
but often a lot of contradictions come up while you're trying to for instance, that happens to me on Martial Geeks, if I can like go back to like martial arts for a bit.
Yeah.
But like I've made at least a couple of videos like sort of voicing my not dissatisfaction, but sort of like the 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 nature of calling certain martial arts techniques. For instance, like I've shown many times, one of my favorite techniques of all time is koregaeshi, just because it's so much fun to do, and it's such a cool little low percentage technique. But like I would struggle because on YouTube you need a title that will get views, and you think like, okay, so should I, if in this sparring session I got the koregaeshi, should I write aikido in grappling? And it's like I could, but initially first learned that technique from like a Chin Na DVD. So in my mind, it's still kung fu, but it's also judo. It's also Japanese jiu-jitsu. It's also catch wrestling. So it's like and then you can write Aikido in the title, and somebody in the comments will be like, that's not actually like Aikido. And then you can sometimes call it Kung Fu, and then Aikido people will get mad. And it's like, but it all breaks down at a certain point. Like the ontology of martial arts
Yeah.
is what it is. Like we're
Yeah.
just calling it this or that, but that bears nothing on the actual ontology of what this thing is. And I feel like that problem is everywhere.
Yeah.
Like it's so hard to, like, when you dig a bit further into a certain discipline or topic, things will start breaking down, and that can be like weird and scary.
Yeah.
So I don't know, it's so fascinating. So I ranted for a bit, but
No, it's
please
you
do
mentioned
continue.
something very, very cool, right? Which is that you break things down, right? Like let's say you break down a social phenomenon, right? So you start with sociology, but eventually you realize, okay, like we got to look at the people. So maybe you look at psychology or
Yeah.
economics or game theory. But then once you look at that, you're like, well, but what are these people believing in? So then eventually it'll get to political science, and then you look at that, you're like, but what is their fundamental beliefs? Then that goes into philosophy, right?
Yeah.
So like you break things down, and ultimately you get to something that's either physics or faith or
Yeah,
both. So like
exactly.
everything, you can always keep going layers and layers down. Like everything
Absolutely.
breaks down after a while. Now this
Yep.
is, you know, the truth is, like, one of the reasons. So I studied the social sciences a lot, right? The humanities a lot when I was in college, and eventually I realized, can you ever get anywhere? Because it all kind of breaks down into something that's like, well, yeah, you bring up something very important. It's something I've thought about, but I haven't thought about too much, because it's almost like you, it can create a form of like nihilism if you really think about it too much. It's like
Yeah.
ultimately it all kind of just breaks down into, and then it's like, what is the purpose of it
Yeah.
all?
It all seems to lead to nihilism. That's oof. That's but here's the funny thing about that. Like, I just recently talked to a friend a bit about this whole thing, about the exact thing, like how things break down, and it's so easy to just because of it fall into nihilism. But it's like like I remember first time thinking about that, I did experience bit of existential like dread because of it. But over time, I
Oh,
learned
that's so
to
funny. As Thomas is, no,
well,
as you were saying existentialism, it froze a little. So it was really funny. I was like, it froze when you say existen.
oh my god, okay, that's convenient.
Yeah.
But I was gonna say, like, how now that I think of it, like I almost find, so I know that there's nihilism in a philosophical sense and in a methodological sense, where it's like you can believe that sort of in a nihilistic proposition that there might not be any reason to anything, and you can also like act on it, and that's like an important difference. And I feel like I've fallen into like the whichever nihilism is, that it seems that there isn't like a reason, but that doesn't mean that what I feel is false, uh, what I believe and want is false, like that morality is false. None of that like breaks down. It's just that overall, we might not be able to like understand why things are what they are, and what's the purpose. But I still have like my day to day life is still the same. Like, it's similar to that whole thing of love is just chemicals in your brain, bro, type guys when they say. And to me, I remember hearing that for the first time. It's like, so what? Sure, like I still feel it the same way. Like I'm not just not gonna feel it because I'm learning that it's just chemicals. Who gives a shit? It's still the same.
Yeah.
So like, to me, it's almost liberating now to like, if I fuck up, if I don't like do something that I wanted to do in my life or whatever, it's like it's almost liberating where it's like, oh well, what can you do now? Who cares? Like, I fucked up. Sure, let's keep on going. But like, if it wasn't that way, it feels like I'd be a bit more like, I don't know, strained. So there's almost like a positive view outlook that you can. Again, I'm. This is just me, so this isn't like advice or anything, because everybody's different. So maybe to somebody else can't relate to this at all, and that's fine because it's all individual. But to me, it's almost like, at least for last, I don't know, couple of years, maybe from COVID onwards, like I find it kind of bit peaceful to think like, oh shit, like if I fuck up, it didn't matter in the end anyways. So it's like, but again, that's like a very specific thing. So yeah, maybe it's not that scary at all, but who knows?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think a general thing to think about for everyone watching is just remember this is you whether there's meaning, there's no meaning, it's good to keep trying to know, right? That's
Yeah.
I always emphasize just keep learning, man. And I think there's even if just again going back to the chemical reactions, even if it's just to keep your brain healthy, it's good to keep learning. I will guarantee you learn a new skill, you learn a new hobby, or even better, try to learn something intellectual. Your brain's going to be so rewarded by it, and it's okay to take your time. You know, like this tax class I'm taking. Some days my mind doesn't want to make sense of it, so just I got other things going on with my life, thank goodness, right? But that also is another point to get to, which is I don't know how. What was Croatia before it became part of Yugoslavia, by the way?
So it's a quite complex history, especially in 20th century. Croatia went through so many regime changes, probably
Ah,
more than the rest of its history back to dating to the beginning. Because look, there
whoa.
were two Yugoslavias. There was one that was like a kingdom thing, and then the republic. But then in between, there's like little regimes. I think like there was a tiny country that lasted for like a few months, and it's one of
What?
the shortest lived countries. But it's like it's total mess. And especially like my hometown, Dubrovnik, that's like the southern town where Game of Thrones was filmed. That's why it's now
Ah.
super famous. Um, but it used to be its own republic. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like even within Croatia, Dubrovnik used to be its own country, and then Croatia was its own thing, and then like Yugoslavia, and then the other one, and like regime changes. So it's like super super. Just I think because of it, like it's also easier to spot like how things break down and how like nationalities don't matter because of that. Like if we had like a stricter history, maybe it would be different. But it's like I don't know, when you learn the history of the country, for us at least, and maybe it's just for me, it sort of like makes you think, huh? So all of this shit is arbitrary. This is all
Yeah.
just like
I
different
will
regimes.
focus my question more, which is
Mhm.
how long slash what periods has Croatia been a democracy?
Oh, so Yugoslavia, the famous one,
Hmm.
was like from after the 40s. So I could be wrong. I'd have to like recheck my history on it. But it was
Hmm.
a like a communist dictatorship essentially with like Tito. And
Hmm.
before that, in the 40s, it was like a Hitler's marionette country, if that makes sense. It was like under.
Okay,
So
yeah.
yeah, it was like a whole. I think Germany bombed like Belgrade or Serbia or something because they were like, and they circled around Croatia. It was like join or get bombed. But unfortunately, a lot of people enjoyed the whole regime thing. So even that wasn't democracy. So before that, I think it was a kingdom, and then like before that was like a democratic system. But I could be wrong. So like the entire 20th century has so many regime changes that are more fluid than the vast history of like centuries before it. But it's I don't know. It's super, super, super crazy. It's super interesting.
So, let's say in the 19th or 18th century, was Croatia part of a kingdom?
So in 18th century, I think we were under the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So we were part of that. So it was an
Uh,
empire. But
uh,
here's an interesting thing. Like if you go to Dubrovnik, all the architecture is Renaissance up to like Baroque times, and it's very Italian looking. It's very like just like typical stone walls in Italy. but at the same time, Zagreb, it feels like you're in Amsterdam, which is interesting because during that period, Dubrovnik wasn't part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire because it was its own country, but Croatia and Northern was. So it's like you can spot just like the differences between one country because of the whole super duper regime difference. So again, but if I go back before the Austro-Hungarian, I think it was a kingdom. So I think democracy is fairly recent. I could be wrong. I'd have to like, I'm not a historian, and I haven't like studied these specific points of Croatia's history for a while. So I'd have to go back, but I'm pretty sure like it's just been like these weird systems all around.
Yeah. The reason I ask is because so this goes back to my talk about how it's just good to learn. It's good to keep building your brain. See, when America was founded, most of our founding fathers were there was like most of them were like hyphenated, if that makes sense. So they were
Right,
inventor, farmer, woodworker slash politician, right?
right,
Most of the people who founded and participated in America's early government had at least like 3 or 4 careers and maybe like 6 hobbies.
right,
I
right,
think that's the type of voter they wanted. And
right.
I picture if society wants to move forward, every voter in a democratic system needs to be like that. I know it's
Yeah,
asking a lot, but we're in a democracy. You have to like just if you don't have at least a few interests, a few things you really know about, how are you even
yeah,
gonna understand what you're voting for, right? Like that's the thing. Like obviously you can seek information,
sure.
you can learn, learn from experts, learn from books, but don't you give yourself just a little bit of a better starting point if you already have like 3 or 4 areas you're kind of an expert at,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So like again, this just goes back to what we started this conversation with and we've been talking about and going back to the whole time. Like how can we as humans be more informed, more critical thinkers? And I think part of it is think about America's founding fathers, like all of them. Like even
yeah,
George Washington, who was a general, was a farmer also, right? Like
yeah.
all these
Oh,
people had Ben Franklin, who founded my university. Like Ben Franklin did everything. He was a diplomat, he was an inventor, he was a journalist. Like he did a lot of stuff. Like you
that,
have to think hyphenated. And again, this goes back to what we were talking about the education system. The education system makes us choose 1 or 2 things. So maybe it again is back to the fault of the education. But then if you really break it down, maybe it's the fault of capitalism, right? Capitalism
right.
wants you to
There's
be a
so much.
specialized worker drone.
So there's so many different points on the spectrum where you can focus and try to find the problem. But I
Yeah.
just remembered to like go back for a bit, then we can
Hmm.
like continue on that thread. But I just remembered a fun little fact, and you can fact check this because I'm not sure. I could be wrong, but
Hmm.
I think I'm right. The first country that supported or accepted America's independence was the Dubrovnik country, the
Oh.
Republic of Ragusa. I think I think it was the first actually. But if you can Google, I don't have my laptop's not connected to the internet.
Okay, let me
But if
look
you
at
can
this.
check,
Hmm.
I think like I've heard that so many times that like this republic when we were its own thing, like spotted America and was like, yeah, you guys are a country.
Wow. Dude, it's crazy. Like the Republic of Ragusa was around for a long time.
Yeah, yeah.
Whoa. That is
So
crazy.
yeah, it was a neat little country. So
Wow. It's just so crazy how after the Roman Empire broke down, how it like so many little things came about. And it's so funny because I'm sure that the Republic of Ragusa had many elements of the Roman Empire in it too.
for sure, for sure, it's so interesting,
Oh
and
yeah,
it's like,
yeah, I see it. Yeah, like you said. In fact, the article's written by a guy named Thomas. Pretty funny.
no,
Yeah, the
that's
Republic of
great.
Ragusa was the first to recognize the U.S. after it
Yeah,
declared
yeah,
independence.
that's so crazy. That's such a crazy connection that like it's so funny to like realize how interconnected things really are.
Yeah.
It's super fun. Just like to be whoa, like back in the day, 17th century, that was like there was a neat connection over there. It's fascinating. History is so cool.
Yeah, I kind of want to look at some books or something on the Republic of Ragusa because it's like these like one of the things that fascinates me a lot is the Phoenicians, right? Because the Phoenicians were
Ah,
like a trade kingdom. They
Mhm.
basically were coastal, and it looks like
Mhm.
the Republic of Ragusa was like one of these coastal
Oh
kingdoms.
yeah,
You
very
know, in
similar.
fact, they seem to have been part of the Venetians from in the
Yeah,
beginning.
yeah, there was like the whole there's still like nationalistic arguments about that stuff. You can imagine there's always that. But it's a fascinating history for sure. Like so it's not because I'm certainly there's some element of bias here, but like Dubrovnik was its own thing, and I feel like it's objectively a bit more like special than the Croatia itself.
Yeah,
Like every
yeah,
country, every it's all super fascinating. But I feel like this was such a small little town, and you can a country, in fact, and there's so many cool facts that you learn from history where it's like objectively there's something like quite cool
yeah,
about this little country.
yeah,
Just like I'm a Croatian, but nothing. Maybe it's bias again because that's my hometown. But the history of this little country that it used to be is so much more fascinating than the rest of the country
yeah,
of now current country. If that makes sense, because
yeah,
like there's like a so it's now a party place or a culture place where you can hang out, but it's built around the first what's the right word? The first quarantine in the world, and that's also part of like this republic. Like Ragusa's republic had like the first, or at least maybe in Europe, but it could be in the world. Again, I could be wrong, but there's a lot of like interesting firsts, if that makes sense. That sort of
wow,
indicates that there is something special about these little countries, and it makes me think like, who knows how many more are there like that? Like some country somewhere that I have no clue about what it even is, but it also was the first in something. So it's like again, to your point, researching stuff is cool, learning stuff is
yeah,
awesome. Like
yeah,
there's so many other places of the world that I have no idea about, but I could find some fun facts like this. Like this little country was the first in this. And it's like, oh shit, I never knew that.
yeah,
And how could I? Because there's so much to
yeah.
know. So so fun. So much
In
fun.
America, when we learned about world history, you know, it was
Mhm.
obviously broken down through like different trends over centuries, right? So like there was no way we learned about the Republic of Ragusa. And
Right,
what's
right.
funny is in college, I almost took a class on European history, and
Hmm.
this that class might have been able to, you know, give me I would have at
Probably.
least known a little bit about all the crazy stuff that
Right.
happened after the Roman Empire fell because, you know, the narrative when we learned world history was okay, the Roman Empire fell and then sort of, you know, Rome survived through the Eastern Roman Empire, but you know, there's the Western Rome, that whole area was just chaotic for a very long time. And then some people who studied more know about the Franks and then
Yeah.
the Holy Roman Empire, the Germans. But like
Mhm.
obviously that whole area was so complicated, and
Oh yeah.
you gotta understand that history after the Roman Empire fell to understand why Europe ended up dominating the world for like 200
Yeah.
years. And like we
There's
don't have enough emphasis on that. It was just like, oh, like China was ahead for a long time and then suddenly the Europeans came with their guns. Like there's always a disconnect from of the narrative. How did it go from like the Europeans were in the Dark Ages to suddenly, oh my God, like the
yeah.
British and the French and the Spanish and the Germans are dominating. Like there's that hole
Crazy.
in how they teach history, and it might be different in Europe. I don't know.
I think it's pretty much the same. Maybe it's like focused on different things, but I think this problems are probably the same stuff. And that's
Hmm.
like that also another pet peeve. I think we touched upon this like earlier when Alan was about like learning just like random facts and like when did this leader of this country sign this document and then this happened.
Yeah.
But sure, fine, I can Google that in like 5 seconds. But what I can't Google is to really understand how people lived back then. That
Yeah.
takes time. So
Yeah.
it's like it's almost focused on just isolated facts that are really arbitrary because you can always like refresh your knowledge. I can
Yeah.
always Google when exactly what conversation took place, but I can't Google right away how people lived, what was the system, how was the economy. That stuff takes a lot of Googling. It
Yeah.
takes actual like learning and understanding, like a historical thing, versus just like learning a bunch of facts that maybe are just like even totally arbitrary today because I can Google all that shit. Like I feel like understanding versus random bits of knowledge is so much more important.
Yeah.
So it's like
Yeah, and I
again,
think that in general, there's a problem with how history is taught because not only is it centered around arbitrary dates, I'll just not be subjective out. It's centered on dates. I'm not going to say they're all arbitrary, but there is a bias towards not just centering them around like dates, but also it's very warfare
oh
centric.
yeah, it's
So like
so
everything leads to war. Everything. So it's like it's too much emphasis on wars. But like you can't just memorize a bunch of dates and bunch of facts about things that led up to World War One or things that led up to the fall of the Roman Empire. Like this is a deep conversation, but things cause the wars, right? Things
yeah.
cause the conflict. And if you don't understand, okay, how was the day to day life? How were the economics? How were the political economy? You're not going to understand. Like, yes, sometimes people just wake up and decide to like stab or shoot, but like that usually doesn't happen. I don't think that happens in most societies.
I agree, but I just remembered a funny story if I can tell you this
Yeah,
because it
please.
perfectly leads into this, and I think you'll laugh because it will also like connect to this exactly what you were just saying, but also to bring it back to a bit of like that existentialism and just like a funny little story. So
Hmm.
I remember, I'm pretty sure I was 10, so that's fourth grade, and we had our like PC and it was like very early. We had it like for just a couple of years, so internet was all super fun to like Google stuff. And I remember, or maybe I was a year older than that. I can't remember, but it's somewhere over there. And one of my classmates entered the classroom, and he was like, "Guess whose birthday is today?" And it's like mine, but also Bruce Lee's. And it's like, oh my God, you have the same birthday. And then somebody else is like, oh, my birthday is when this famous person or this famous event. I was like just standing there. Well, my birthday is in the middle of the summer, so I never get to like talk in school about birthdays. But I was like, oh, I can Google my date and see what comes up. So I went home and I wrote down my date of birth, and the first thing that came up was the first day of World War One.
Wow. Yeah.
And it started in the Balkans as well. That's
Yeah,
where
it
the
started with you guys. Yeah.
so it was like Serbia didn't want to answer the ultimatum of Austria-Hungary, and it started the World War One. And I was like, just close X and be like, fuck, that's that's the worst birthday ever.
Yeah.
And I vividly remember that like being a little bit of like that disappointment and like just existence. So that's super funny to me.
And it's
So
funny
yeah.
because when we started the conversation, I don't know if you were here when Alan, we didn't go live yet, but Alan was talking about how he doesn't really celebrate birthdays, right? And I don't really
Yeah.
celebrate birthdays either, but it makes me realize because birthdays have such a big emphasis, maybe that's a way to get people to be interested in like social science or like in general in a lot of these subjects. Like
Right,
teach
right.
them common events and then famous birthdays on their birthday. So like what
Right.
events happen on their
That's a
birthday?
cool
That's
idea.
a segue. And then what famous people were born on their birthday? I just realized that could be a
That's
starting point.
that's such a good idea. Holy
Yeah.
shit.
Because you learned that the World War One started on your birthday many years ago, right? So like maybe
So I
that's
learned
yeah.
I learned that it started here before we taught it in school. So
Yeah. Yeah.
there you go.
So maybe
That's a good point.
this is a little thing we could do. I mean, it's just I just want citizens to be informed, and
Right.
you're in a democratic country, I'm in a democratic country now. Obviously, there's the argument of how democratic are our countries, right? But
Yeah.
theoretically, ideally, normatively, a democratic country. And if you believe in that stuff, and even if you don't believe in that stuff, got to be informed. And
Right.
it's just,
And I feel even, oh, sorry if I cut you
no,
off.
go ahead, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, even if we, like, when we spoke about things breaking down, even if we ignore like the politics and like that you mentioned, the if you're in democracy, like you do have sort of a responsibility to know stuff. Even if we take that away, I feel like what's the single most sorry, what's the single most recognizable thing that makes humans humans? It's we ask questions and we learn stuff.
Yeah.
So it's like almost at the most fundamental of levels, what makes us us is learning things. So it's like even if we go deeper and beyond that, like we go into the, I don't know, aspects of philosophy or science or faith, even over there, it feels like just by existing, that's what you're here for, to learn. And if there like I remember when I was first like uh I'm sorry. Ooh, I do have a cold, so my voice is a bit.
Oh, it's all good.
I
I
gotta
forgot, honest. I forgot you had a cold until
gotta
you
quickly
mentioned.
cough, and I'll be
Yeah.
back. Just quickly cough into the mic.
So, anyways, guys, this conversation we're probably winding down, but this was a really fun first conversation, and I want to bring on more people like this. So
Oh yeah, this
definitely.
was so cool.
Hmm.
But I was gonna say, yeah, if there is some sort of cosmic intelligence or a purpose, I think the best bet would be that it's for us to learn and to start like keep learning. If there is any sort of judgment, it's like were you learning that just like by a default state of how things are. If
Yeah.
there is something, I'm pretty sure it'd be that rather than some arbitrary thing.
Yeah.
But again, that's just like a idea. But to me, that makes so much sense. It's like, I don't know, the famous quote, "We're the universe contemplating itself." Like, isn't that like already so cool? And isn't that like enough?
Yeah.
So yeah,
That's a deep quote. Yeah, because
yeah,
we were created from the universe and somehow we can contemplate the universe. So we are technically the universe contemplating itself. That
exactly.
is really that's like, ooh, that's a
That
metaphysical type of cool quote.
that's such a cool one. I love
Yeah.
that one. That's so cool.
Yeah. So, Thomas, especially because you're sick, I think this is actually a good point to end this. But,
Right.
dude, thank you so much for joining. And for those of you who
Thank
saw
you.
Alan later or later when this goes live again and you guys see Alan, yeah, thank you to both. This was fun. And I want to do more of these because it's cool to kind of get people who I interact with in other means and then we kind of like can talk about life and society. And it makes this channel something I want to kind of keep going with because I showed you this channel. I half stepped away from it for many years, but obviously these conversations need to continue. They need to continue. Like society just got more and more polarized after I stepped away from this channel, and it's there's a lot to think about, a lot to break down. So we'll definitely do more. So, anyways, Thomas, thank you so much. And you can send me privately your personal channel if you want, and I can link it in the description and stuff later if people want to check that out. So just let me know if you want to send me your personal channel.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I'll stop talking because I got a cough so
Yeah,
bad.
I can tell. I can tell. It's your
But thank
vocal
you,
cords need the rest. So
man. Thank you so much.